Amen.
Amen. All right.
Thank you, Daniel. So, as Daniel suggested, we're going to begin our class today with the joy of meeting one of the families that we support in this church as one of our primary missionaries. Now, as you know, Parkwood's identity has always been deeply steeped in missions. And that tradition has carried on in this church since 1967. And over time, the church is becoming increasingly sophisticated about the way it interacts in its mission support. And we could not be happier that we have 4 primary missionary families that we support all around the globe. And we are doubly blessed that they from time to time can be in our midst. And so I could not be happier this morning than to invite Patrick and Kayla and their lovely daughter to be introduced to us in our Sunday school class. The formatting for this is for them to come and give a brief presentation and for you to have time for questions. And then they're going to be whisked out of this room, much like the rapture. And they will be going to other Sunday school classes with Pastor Daniel to meet other classes. But Patrick and Kayla and Chloe, would you come now and greet our folks? Let's welcome our friends. Where did the microphone go? Daniel? Where is it? No, the one you had. There it is. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm PJ, or Patrick. This is my wife, Kayla, and our daughter, Zoe, and we're the Howans. First off, we want to say, we know we're all missionaries, so we know you all have your mission fields that you're doing here. God has called us to Nigeria, but we are thankful to walk this journey with you. So, truly, we're very thankful to be a part of this church family. Thank you for being with us, for praying for us, for supporting us, because we know we couldn't do the work that God has called us to do without you. So thank you so much for that. We've been in Nigeria for the last 5 years. When we first wanted to be missionaries, it was even before we had even met. We both felt that we were called to be missionaries. And we didn't know where, we didn't know what we were going to do, but we knew that God had called us to be missionaries. So even before, when I wanted to date Kayla, she said, hey, listen, I'm going to be a missionary. So if this isn't going to be a part of your life, don't even try. And I said, hey, actually, that's actually what I want to do also. So we have the background of special education. After school, we got married, and we said, hey, let's go be missionaries. And then we had something called student loans.
Oh, no.
So we felt like that was a barrier, something kind of holding us back. But we realized in that time that we were not prepared to be missionaries yet. And God prepared us in that time. We became foster parents, got administrative degrees within special education and principal. Kayla had real bad back surgery. But through all of those things, we learned to grow together as a family. We felt God preparing us. And then eventually we were able to pay off those loans. We sold our house. We lived in a camping trailer again. That taught us how to live without electricity and air conditioning and all of those tough things. But it's so fun to look back now and see how God prepared us for Nigeria. And in the moments where we were saying, oh, why can't this hurry up? And God was saying, I'm preparing you. I'm preparing you. So now being in Nigeria, we're so thankful. We feel like God's using our gifts to partner with people in Nigeria. We've helped start a primary and secondary school where they do things in a different way. In Nigeria, people they'll beat the children in the classroom. So we're teaching them to do it in a different way, and it's being successful, and they're even trying it in their homes and communities. Kayla works at a baby clinic where she's teaching lactation. We're fostering. We've fostered 5 babies there. We're working with young adults. So we're truly seeing all of those areas where we were saying, oh, we're ready to go. And God said, you're not ready yet. And now we're seeing that all come into play So we're truly just so grateful to God for his timing. We know his timing is best. But also we want to encourage you. You have your mission fields here. And God's going to use each and every one of you in a different way. So just because we're in Nigeria, that doesn't make us any better missionaries. It just makes us different. That's where we are. But you have your communities and your families and your workplaces that you get to touch lives too. So just know we're praying for you also. And we're excited to hear, when we get our fellowship time, hear about what God's doing in your lives. And
I think just forgive us for like my deer in the headlight look. We're a little culture shocked going back and forth. So we're adjusting, and we always say we miss the people on both sides of the ocean, and we just kind of, get used to it, culture on both sides as well. So thank you for accepting us and loving us as we are, and we're so thankful to be with you.
And we have an opportunity. We'll share more during the service. Yes.
I would say, speaking of culture, what are the amenities that you have now where you live? Do you have inside toilets and all that, like electricity and tap water?
So we have toilets at our house, but if you go other places, it's usually just a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
There's electricity anywhere between 8 to 13 hours a day. It's not really consistent, so you never know when. I think the longest we went was maybe 2 weeks without electricity. Water, we have a borehole and a well where we live, but we have to purify our water. It wouldn't be safe to drink it without. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So when you first went to Nigeria, tell us a little bit about what it meant or felt like, or what you experienced diving from North America into another culture. What were the things you had to learn that were significant right off the bat?
Truly, it's just the small things day to day. How do we drink water? How do we set up the water system, the electricity, all of those pieces. But really, the relationships are the part that we love. The Nigerian people is what we truly love. But I found out I was offending everyone all the time, and I didn't know it. But it's just cultures are different. So
how did you offend them?
Well, in America, you can go to the grocery store, and you don't even have to talk to anyone. You just get whatever you need, and then you can go. But in Nigeria, people will greet, and you'll greet for maybe 5 minutes, even with people you don't know. So greeting is a huge part of the culture there. It's a huge sign of respect. But I'd see someone, they would say hi to me, I'd say hi, and then I'd keep going. And I didn't know that I was offending people, but they said, hey, you need to slow down. Even if you don't know someone, slow down, take the time. And so coming back here, like Kayla said, it's the culture shock of it's back and forth both ways. But there's just a lot of small things like that where over time we had a close enough relationship where like, hey, just so you know, when you do this, it makes people feel uncomfortable or those types of things. So it's been great though. It's nice that we have people close enough to us that take an interest, that want us to be able to do better.
Right.
So we're thankful for those relationships.
I think also just the perspective is, Zoe was a great reminder to us when we were driving, just got off the airplane, hopped in a van, we're driving to where we live now, 5 hours drive, and PJ, in his mind, he didn't say anything out loud, but in his mind, he's like, where did I bring my girls? Like just looking, just poverty we've never seen before, kids wearing no clothes, or ripped clothes where they're, like just running the streets alone without adults. All these different scenarios where it just felt really heavy, and we just kept quiet and just took it in. And Zoe verbalized on the drive there, wow, look at the beautiful dresses, and like, this place is beautiful. And she was right. She was looking past all the other things, seeing bright colored dresses, and her favorite was the red dirt, and I just can't wait to get my hands in that. She wanted to play with it, and we were seeing the trash on the street and all the other things, but it's perspective of like, it really is a hard place full of beautiful people, and that's what we love so much about it.
How did Nigeria become the place that you were sent?
Yeah, great question. How is Nigeria the place we were sent? We prayed and prayed about it when we joined our mission agency, which is SIM. They're out in North Carolina. We went and we did a lot of training with them. And after the training, they said, all right, now we're going to decide, where are you going to go? Because some people were like, oh, I'm going to Costa Rica. I'm going to go do this ministry. For us, we said, we'll go anywhere in the world. We know special education. We know foster care. We'll go anywhere. So they said, well, really, you could go anywhere. Like, where do you want to go? And we said, just give us some options. So they gave us, I think, 7 options, most of them in Africa, I think 1 in South America. We took time, we prayed about them separately. And then when we came together, we had the same top 2, which were Nigeria and South Africa. And as we prayed more and more about it, Nigeria seemed like the harder place, but Nigeria also it's kind of the heart of Africa. A lot of the trends come from Nigeria, the movies, the music, a lot of comes from Nigeria. So for us, we thought if we can have an impact in Nigeria, how much further could it go? So as we prayed about it, that's where we felt led.
I just mentioned one thing is they do speak English in Nigeria. Which
Oh yes, yep. They speak over 500 tribal languages, but English is one of the main languages there.
Are you operating in an area where you're under threat from Boko Haram?
I mean, I would say yes. We're in Jos, so we're about halfway up Nigeria. Where we live, it's about half Christian, half Muslim, and there's a lot of tension. But there's kidnapping happening all the time. There's a lot of deaths. I mean, within 30 to 40 minutes of where we live, that Christians are being killed. So it's happening and it's very real.
I think within the city we live in, there's certain areas we can't travel freely. It's a very clear Muslim line, Christian line, so we're not welcome to go there unless we were invited by a Muslim friend who would have to be right by our side, and unfortunately would put their life in danger. So that's within our city. Within the country, if we went any further north, we have to just be very careful. And people do. Zoe and I have traveled further north. PJ's traveled a little bit. But it's always with as much wisdom as we can ask God for, and we do it very carefully. But it is a very real fear. In our current area where we live and stay and where we drive through to work, at the care center, at the safe house each day, they're kidnapping individuals, and so it's not necessarily Boko Haram, but definitely a kidnapping threat. And unfortunately, they just took the first expat this past year. In the past, they target the Nigerians that are close with the expats. And so that's kind of the danger is you're putting other people, we're not scared for our life necessarily, but the ones that we love around us is who they actually take, is how it kind of works. And this past year, they took an expat, which is just kind of the next level because it comes an international incident, sort of. But I don't know if that really answers your question. They're definitely prevalent, and with the new change in president, we'll see what happens. They just got a new president, so we'll see.
And the 7 northern states of Nigeria are under Sharia law, so it's under Muslim law. But yeah, the president, he's a Muslim, and then the vice president is also Muslim, where usually it's Muslim and Christian. But usually there's a mixture, but right now it's 2, so we'll see what that means for Nigeria.
So I know there is a religious freedom, but in reality there is a conflict between the religions.
There's a lot of conflict between the religions. It's about 50% Christian, 50% Muslim. But yeah, there's definite conflict and tension between the religions, and then there's herdsmen that are usually Muslim, and then there's farmers who are usually Christian. So sometimes someone will eat someone else's farmland, so it might start out as a village conflict and it turns into a religious thing, but it goes back and forth both ways, where Muslims will kill Christians and Christians will kill Muslims. It's a retaliation both ways.
You know, it's a shame to have all those negative things around you, but, you know, that's very positive to be able to go, or to go to like a grocery store and you have to greet people because they still have those wonderful values and virtues that, I noticed that when I was stationed overseas. And I think it's because Americans we're very snobbish, really. And there's many countries that are very much like, if you don't say Guten Tag, you know, it's just like, what's wrong? You know, that's German. And so we do get a better appreciation of what we have here, and the people that think that this country is not that great, well, go to somewhere else. But still, the people that you meet, they got heart. It's unfortunate that you have these other issues going on that you have to live with.
Daniel, do you need to transition now?
Our 5 minutes is up.
Well, here's the problem. You're in very high demand today. So.
We just have to end this one
Yep.
at this point, and I'm going to take it out of here.
Well, very nice to meet you all. And we'll be out in the fellowship hall so we can talk more.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. It's always just overwhelming to hear how the gospel, in almost any context on the globe, by necessity must take a certain form. And I couldn't have been more fascinated by how, when you land in a country that is not your own, the degree to which what you do and what you say and what that means can be so radically different from one place to the next. So, for example, for this young couple to come from Minnesota, having lived in Arizona, to then go to Nigeria and discover that their own customary pleasantries of every day, so, you know, someone says hello and you say hello and keep walking, you know, you imagine that you have satisfied what's necessary in that community to communicate your interest or care for someone else. And so, I mean, here we don't, I mean, you know, as this community's changed, people don't even say hello. And they don't even look at you, right? It depends on where you are. But to be there and take the time to say hello and keep walking is an offense. It's simply an offense. If you don't pause to interact, that could take 5 minutes. Can you imagine the gap that demonstrates to all of us about how culture matters? That's where I'm going. Culture matters. Jinsu, I'm sure that when you travel back to South Korea, it's culture shock in a sense.
Yes, I have to kind of refresh my memory how to.
Right, how to
Sometimes I
interact.
have to bow to the people.
Of course, of course.
Elderly people,
Eh.
Otherwise, I consider to be very rude.
Right. You don't want to be perceived as rude or to do anything that is going to, shall we say, subvert your relationship to the people in the community you hope to help. Well, you know, this is the kind of education that I think is essential in the life of any church that cares about the gospel's propagation around the world. And if you'll remember, we started this year in this class with the question, what is the church? And we began with questions around what did the early church look like? And then after we got through a fairly lengthy engagement about that, we began to talk about, well, what did they believe? What did these folks believe and take themselves to know? And then in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've spent a lot of time doing some hard work, making sure that we have an appreciation of the soil or the ground or the culture within which the earliest Christians had to operate, and what that could mean for our understanding of the very faith that we profess. But that still leaves an enormous issue or question for us. It's one thing to try to appreciate what the cultural, you might say, soil that the gospel was planted in looked like. But the question now is, for us, I think for the next 6 weeks probably, is, well, what about our own culture? In what ways do we have to be aware within our own culture of how that culture influences how the gospel is articulated or professed or shaped? And what are the ways in which that negotiation is supposed to take place? Because as you'll remember, we only had to spend a little bit of time with the Apostle Paul to realize that the gospel sometimes uses aspects of any particular culture. Sometimes it is in absolutely no conflict with that culture, and at other times it has to stand over against aspects of that emerging culture. Just from an intellectual standpoint, for example, we've heard over the last 2 weeks the different ways that prevailing ideas or ideologies or philosophies influence people's moral perspectives. Like how the Stoics, for example, had the idea that, the whole thing about achieving happiness in life was earning the capacity to, one, not let your passions be in charge, but your reason, and to find a way for your reason to align itself with some greater divine purpose in nature. Okay? Well, the Apostle Paul was very familiar with these impulses and instincts. And on the one hand, he would, shall we say, be supportive of a kind of Stoic orientation when it comes to some things, but in other ways, the Apostle Paul had to resist it. For example, their denial of any kind of personal God. So this takes place in every generation of the Christian church. The church has to come to terms with or deal with its own culture. And to not be aware that we're influenced by our culture, but we also have to speak into that culture, is really a failure on our part not to take seriously the kind of ministry that Peter and John and Paul and all the other early voices that we hear in the New Testament speak to us. So, in the next 6 weeks, we're going to be looking at the church in this culture. And I'm interested to know what are things on your mind as to how to negotiate that particular challenge. Because we all share the same scriptures. We all are, shall we say, of one Lord, one faith, one baptism. And yet we live in a world where we have to communicate the gospel and do so in the context of our wider culture. There are very distinct subcultures in North America, if you're not aware. Does anybody want to identify some of our subcultures? Anybody that happened to grow up in the South, for example, want to speak to anything connected to that subculture? Anyone who grew up in the Northeast want to say anything about that subculture?
I'll throw this out.
You're very brave, my brother.
I think this is okay to say.
Go right ahead.
When my children say, yeah, no, in response to a question.
From their father. Oh, my goodness. What have you done?
And go up. And for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, it's, even though they're my children, and when they say that to other adults, it's yes, sir, no, sir, yes, no, no, ma'am. Because that is beat into you as a child.
Right.
From the time you can speak, your parents will correct you all the way through. And so I'll say yes, ma'am, to some cashier who could be my daughter in a store, right?
Yeah.
It's just there. And my kids are growing up in Northern Virginia where they're not getting that reinforced.
Right.
And they come home and they say, yeah, no. And I'm like, what? Did you hear that? You just said yeah to me? It's like,
Right. I mean, it is. If I grew up in a similar circumstances, and it takes a long time not to be offended.
it sounds like a power trip, I'm sure, to people who aren't from that.
Sure.
Like, you're kind of, tyrant, are you?
Right. Well, let me give you using the same language in another cultural context. So I'm a young, recently graduated seminary student. And I have gone to Great Britain, to South Wales, to get fitted for a tuxedo for a wedding that I'm going to be play a major part in on June the 6th of 1987. And so while I'm there, I go visit a professor that was a visiting professor at Yale when I was in school. And when I meet him, he's very welcoming, and he says, "What are you doing for graduate school?" I said, "Well, I was thinking about applying here, or thinking about applying here." He goes, "What do you think about coming here?" Well, I was stunned because, first of all, this guy was the leading figure in the philosophical interests that I had. But I also knew that in Britain, there's no money for American foreign students. PhD programs in the United States often underwrite the students that they invite to take them. But as a foreign student, I knew there was no money available to me, so it never occurred to me to be interested in this program. I said, "Well, I can't afford it." And he kind of reared back in his chair and he said, "But aren't you marrying a Welsh girl?" Ding, 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 ding. I said, "As a matter of fact, I am." He said, "Let me make a phone call." Well, he didn't tell me the upshot of the phone call, but he invited me to lunch. So we go to lunch and we go to the faculty lounge. It's very formal there. We went to the faculty lounge and we're sitting at a large round table like this, just larger, and it was low. So we're all sitting around having our various sandwiches. And I'm sitting here and the professor's sitting here and there's this gentleman here. And we come to the end and he says, I say to him, "Well, Professor, if I'm going to try to come here, don't I need an application?" And he says, "Jeff Willits, this is Peter White. Peter White, this is Jeff Willits. Jeff, go with Peter." What is going on? I mean, it's so bizarre. So anyway, I follow this man named Peter to his office. Well, we get to his office and his big desk in the fancy building that, was built in 18th century. And he says, "So Professor Phillips would like for you to study with him, is that correct?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He reared back and he goes, "We reserve such language for the crown." He was joking, but what he was saying to me is, we don't say "sir" among common Welsh people. We greet each other, but it's not "yes, sir" or "yes, ma'am." That's hilarious and silly. I mean, you come off sounding silly, saying things like that. I said, "My apologies." And then he went on to say, "You'll have a letter in 2 weeks." That was the sum total of my application for graduate school in Britain. I got friends sweating blood trying to get into these schools, writing applications, getting references. No, that was it. But the point is that in the context of all that, to say yes, sir, to the registrar of the university, that's who he was hilarious to him. It was nonsense. And he pointed it out. Well, if something as simple as what Jeff has identified can have that kind of impact on us as a function of our subculture, just imagine the broader implications of culture for all of us. And what worries me sometimes is that as churches, we blithely go along without any critical reflection, without ever asking any questions about all the influences that, shall we say, perpetuate more culture than Jesus. Okay? What are our see, you bristle. You bristle at the notion of your own child saying, yep, or yeah. Or you betcha. Yeah, that would really get it. Use guys. Yeah. But you see my point. If that causes us to bristle, just imagine other things that come up in the course of our own culture that cause us to reel or bristle and get upset. Or cause us to, raise our fists and say, yeah. Without any analysis, serious analysis, whether that's got anything to do with God or Jesus or anything else. Were you going to say something?
Yeah. Looking back.
Yes, sir, please.
Yes, sir.
No, just kidding.
Looking back, it's almost funny, but my greatest culture shock growing up in western Minnesota was the battle between the Lutherans and the Catholics.
Oh, of course. Now, to folks like myself, for whom Catholics were a mystery as a child, I didn't know any, first of all. Lutherans, I didn't even know what a Lutheran was until I was, basically out of college in terms of meeting any number. And yet you've got this subculture in the north, the mid, what do you call it? The upper Midwest. Yes, thank you. It takes me a minute. The upper Midwest, to see these tensions. Now you can take the same thing and say, my mother would say things to me like, well, why are they always having all this trouble? Back when the Protestant Catholic, battle in Ireland was so prominent in the news. Why is there all this trouble? You look at the Palestinian and Israeli conflict that's going on, right? Why is there all this trouble? It all has a history. It's connected to the wider cultural dynamics. And our culture is often a microphone for deeper social and political events or history. It's a very long history.
Whether the king or queen was Catholic or not Catholic.
It also depends on who. You heard the young man say earlier. You heard him, Patrick, say, well, the Muslim and Christian communities live close, but the Muslims are in the north and the Christians are in the south, and then there are those you might call border communities where the tensions are, are ever present. Well, why is that? Well, there's a long history there, and it takes, we have to be aware. But when you're raised up in it, that them over there are the bad guys and we're the good guys. We're always the good guys. We're never the bad guys. That also has an impact on how we think about church. And I use the word church in the sense that, the collective gathered people of God who show up regularly for worship. We all come with very obvious pre-understanding of how we think the world is. And you may find out very quickly through missions, for one example, that the world isn't that way at all. My sister said something to me that I did not appreciate. But she grew up in the same system I grew up in, which is the Southern Baptist missionary educational machine. And in those days, it was things like ACTEENS or GAs or, what was that, Girls in Action? Or Royal Ambassadors for the young men and for the boys. The point is that way back in the 60s, the 70s, you'd have missionaries coming from overseas, and they'd come back and they'd tell you all of these kinds of things. And you learned a lot about the world and how not like you it is. And that was humbling, and it was helpful. And it helped us be better, more sensitive to how the rest of the world works. But we've become increasingly, dare I say, increasingly isolated in our appreciation of the rest of the world. One of the things that surprised a number of my friends who came from other parts of the world to visit is the degree to which the news, you turn on the nightly news, the degree to which our news is so domestic. It's very poor about telling you what's going on in the rest of the world. I mean, major events can be going on that they're aware of, and they're like, why is that not on your news? And we have no idea.
It's because we don't watch BBC.
Well, exactly. BBC World News. Yeah. But it's true. English-speaking news in this country is dominated by domestic interests and does a very poor job of telling you what's going on in the rest of the world. My point is that we don't get a pass. If we're faithful, we don't get a pass on having to think about our understanding of what it means to follow Jesus without thinking about what it means to follow Jesus in a very particular culture. And so I'm going to want to spend the next few weeks talking about, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? How does that influence us? And what, it's not like the things we believe stand independent of our culture. No, they are very much intertwined with it. And how do we understand what we say are important to us? And so, are there topics that you want to make sure we cover? Are there issues or questions you have, or puzzles, or things that you want us to think about? Yes?
Sure. So just looking at American culture and how that impacts folks being Christians here.
Yep.
I mean, I think a couple of trends that would be interesting to discuss are, one would be sort of, there's a lot of American myth-making about individuality.
Sure. It's one of our deepest.
Yes.
That's
right.
one of our deepest ideas.
We have this concept of, ourselves as being very self-directed, self-actualized. I accomplished X on my own.
Right. The autonomous self.
Right.
Yep.
And so how that feeds into
Okay.
Americans doing sort of very DIY faith.
Sure. Sure.
And that feeds into being Baptist in particular.
No, Baptists are the best at it.
Yes, right. But
And how is that a problem?
works.
It's a great,
American-
right. How is that good and how is that bad? Yeah, that's right.
So that is one thing.
And
then
right.
also, I perceive this to be a particularly American thing, that a lot of Americans get their patriotism very mixed up with their Christianity
Okay.
in ways that I have a sense doesn't happen in the same way in a lot of other countries.
Well, we have had what has been described in the press over the last, 2 or 3 years, concerns over the rise of what's described as Christian nationalism. What is that? And what are we talking about? And what are the broad concerns in relationship to one's allegiances, first, to God and then to country? What does that mean? Okay, that's two very good ones. other questions you'd like to wrestle with or look at or wonder about and see where our Christianity and our popular culture connect.
Yeah, well, the role of women in the church.
Okay.
I hate to say that, but
Why would you say that now? Why would that come up now? Yes. No, there's no question. I mean, if you think about the radical cultural changes that have taken place with respect to women just in the United States, I mean, it's been, good Lord. If you look at the history, you know, the suffrage movement in the 1900s, 1920s in particular, well, that'll work, about 30, 40-year movement that was critical to radical changes in how we understand who counts as a citizen. And then just project that on through our recent history. Yes, where women are in relationship to the wider culture is a radically different place than where it was 30 years ago, where it was 60 years ago, where it was 100 years ago. Radical. I mean, you can't just, it would take a minute to describe it, and we'll try to, but yes, women, that's perfect. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, just in following up on that, I used to joke that after the Apostle Paul, it took about 100 years for the men to get the women back in their proper place.
Oh, yes. All these Christian women feeling their freedom, you know, they had to put them back in their place, right? That's how some people would describe it. Yeah.
You know, Pastor, last week or whenever it was, you talked about women in regards to the rules and laws of the Baptist Church.
Well, the
And how things have
Southern
changed.
Baptist Convention in particular,
Well, that's what you're talking about.
the Constitution.
So, what Kathy's saying is looking at the broad aspect.
Right.
And maybe that's the reason why there's these issues with religion, with the Baptist Church.
Sure.
So you could talk to both of those issues.
Absolutely, and we will. Yeah, it's so that's excellent. Thank you. All right, so we've got relationship to kind of one of our founding ideologies, which is the self or the individual. Talked about patriotism or nationalism more properly. We've talked about women in the church, others that are important to you. You want to have a conversation about.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about how to change the culture, because religion and culture is kind of inseparable in my mind.
Of course.
Yeah, it's so we have to think about how to change the culture through our discussion and our meditation, so that the culture is conformed to God's will. I think that's really important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Others? And others may emerge as we have these conversations week over week. With your permission, yes, go ahead, Roger.
Just one comment.
Yeah.
It's interesting when we had a little battle with South and North Korea that there was a call to send missionaries to Korea. And now Korea is sending missionaries all around the world.
If you don't know, Korea is probably producing more missionaries, South Korea, more missionaries than any other country in the world.
Right. And the other part of that was when we conquered Japan, there was the same call to send missionaries to Japan when
Sure.
they would have been receptive.
Well, there was a lot of
and they really
work to be done.
didn't go. And there's a dramatic difference between South Korea and Japan in the
today.
acceptance of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Christianity today
Yeah,
because of it.
Korean missionaries that I'm familiar with, there's been a growing broad strategy to work back through China and all the way down the 40th parallel, all the way to the middle. I mean, it's incredible how ambitious and how well South Korean missionaries have been doing their work in Southeast Asia and China. It's just mind-boggling to see the work that they've done. Anything else? All right. So what we'll do is next week, with your permission, could we start with the question of women? Well, here's the reason. It's very timely in the sense that I know that will be a matter of discussion in our Sunday school classes at some point, because the church needs to have its discussion about what's happened in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so what I imagine is that the church council will invite the church to entertain some questions in relationship to what's happened in the Southern Baptist Convention. And that's likely to be done primarily through the Sunday school classes. So,
I was just going to say, the first thing you're going to have to do, Jeff, for the world is define what a woman is.
well,
You don't have to do it now, but that's a very
yeah,
difficult
but
thing.
that also raises another, important issue culturally. I mean, the things that to many people would have seemed absurd and may still seem absurd are commonplace among us now. And that too is something that deserves attention with the church. It's important. We need to have those conversations. Any others?
Why don't we just talk about the biblical verse where he's saying, I forgot where it exactly is, but the women should be quiet and they should not speak up in the church.
Yeah. You're talking about the pastoral letters.
Right, pastoral letters.
and-
So I think we have to address that.
Yeah, you don't want to start there.
Oh,
You don't want to start, well, you may start there in the sense that is where a lot of people want to start.
right.
But that would be a bad place to start, because it would be a deep confusion, I'm afraid, if you start there alone. In other words, what we'd probably do is look at all those texts that are relevant before we launch into a conversation. Anything else? All right, thank you for your time, and we'll go out and have some fellowship, and our missionaries will be out there if you have any further follow-up questions with them. All right, thank you all. Appreciate it. Woohoo!